Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Lunchtime Discovery series. My name is Chris. I am your host today for our very special program. Thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here on the internet for today's program. The Lunchtime Discovery series is brought to you by the North Carolina Office of Environmental Education within the Department of Environmental Quality. Many thanks to them for working so hard and diligently to bring us a great show every single week right here. Wednesdays at noon, you can find experts, special guests, people who know a lot about stuff joining us to share their expertise with us. We learn something new every week. It's a great time. We give you the chance to ask questions. And it's really exciting because the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences gets to work with the Environmental Education Office to put on this show. So we host it out of the museum, or as it would be right now, the spare room in my house where I had some space for a camera and a computer. Normally you would find us inside the museum doing the show. We're not doing that right now, but here we are. So brought to you by NCMNS and the Office of Environmental Education is, I guess that's the way I should really put it every time, shouldn't I? But if you've been to this show before, you know how things go. We're going to meet our very special guest. And then after the presentation, you'll have a chance to ask your questions and leave your comments. So whether you're watching on YouTube or over at livestream.com, you can use the chat box, which I think is over there, and drop your thoughts, your questions as we go through the program. When we get to the end, I've got it all pulled up right here, and I will moderate your questions and comments back to our guest. So we can have a cool conversation and start some dialogue. Now, normally in my introduction for a show with a guest like today's, I would make some quip about how they didn't have to travel very far to get to the museum in order to give their presentation, because Jason Whitman is an exhibit designer for the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences. Of course, he didn't have to travel at all, even like coming up from his office down to the basement of the museum to get to this presentation. Looks like he just had to walk across the house and turn on the computer. So let's welcome Jason Whitman to the show. Hey, Jason.
Hey, Chris. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for doing this. How have things been in quarantine?
I mean, quarantini. Yeah, just finding that balance between work life and making models at home, virtually and physically. Still going in. As you know, the museum has opened up, so we have been on site supporting where we can. Still telecommuting where we can as well. So yeah, we're just all figuring it all out.
Yeah, everybody, the museum opened its doors yesterday, September 22nd, which was kind of cool. It was the first day of autumn. And, so this great sort of nature moment for the museum to open back up. And I was back in the museum yesterday too. And it was great to see all of the work that the exhibits and design team has put into making the museum a safe place for visitors to come back into, and the modifications that have gone throughout both buildings. It's incredible the work that went into it.
Thanks.
Really cool stuff.
Yeah.
Great job.
Thank you very much. Yeah, we have a really great team. I'm just one of many exhibit designers that we have on site. We have 3 people who do graphics, one of which is our direct supervisor. We have 2 fabricators, and then we have our director of exhibits, Ed, who we also have a great support staff that comes from digital media, who's helping us facilitate this right now as we speak. So yeah, it's been all hands on deck, just making sure that everything can happen, and just making do, and we'll just keep adjusting as need be. We're glad everyone can start coming back.
Excellent stuff. Well, Jason, let's learn a little bit about exhibit design.
Sure. All right. Yeah, thank you. I'm just gonna hop into the old share screen and just kind of give everyone a brief overview of things that we do at the museum. I've been at the museum professionally at the museum for over 5 years. Before then, I was actually serving as a volunteer intern, and that was on site at the museum. And before that, I was actually out at our at our wet lab out at Prairie Ridge, where I was helping volunteer cycle through different jars, update labels, things like that. So um, it's been a real good long experience, which has kind of given me a little piece of everything at the museum. Um, so with that, I will just get right into it. Let's see if I can get this going for y'all. Um, There we go. All right. Um, so my specialty at the museum is model work. I work with another model maker. We are responsible for a lot of the aesthetics that you see throughout the museum, as far as all the three-dimensional elements. Um, we help serve not just the museum experience as far as dioramas. We also serve educators, we serve curators, researchers, we help with events, uh, we help with incoming exhibits, and so it's a really great gig. We get to just kind of make fake things all the time, but with that, we also have to maintain those things. As some of you may know, if you haven't visited a museum, it's a great museum. It's two buildings. The older building has a majority of our dioramas. Uh, Within that building, we tell the story of the mountains to sea. So starting from the first floor, extending through the third floor, you can essentially travel North Carolina in this open air diorama setting. You go from beach to the Piedmont, to Savannah, through the mountains, through the mountain cove. Um, Now, our fourth floor, we also have our bug, our arthropod zoo. Um, these particular dioramas, when first built, are fairly unique to the museum experience in that they are open air. And with that, it brings some challenges. A lot of other museums, you'll have these things behind glass and they can stay pretty well preserved for a very long time. You still have to do some maintenance here and there, but since we have essentially, we want a immersive experience. And so to acquire that, we're just trying to drop you right in the middle of it without putting you directly in the middle there with that beaver. Um, so with that, we don't get the luxury of rain. We don't get the luxury of wind and nature doing the cleanup for us. So we have had the privilege of being able to go in while everything's been kind of locked down, and working, in safe proximity to each other to start to tackle these things. Some of the more challenging things about these dioramas is that some of the dioramas actually extend 2 stories, like you see here in the Piedmont. Not only do you get this sort of first person level view, it also goes up to the third floor overlook, because we're dealing with life-size trees. Um, Interesting thing about some of these trees is that they are, I get the question a lot of, is it real? These trees are a mix of fake and real. A lot of times with these, we'll have plaster casts, or plaster embellishments done with silicone on these trees, and it's just kind of layered up. But within that, you'll have real branches stuck in, but some of those real branches will have fake leaves. So it's a lot of stuff to keep in mind. Um, and within all those big items, you have lots of little items that you have to keep track of. So we step lightly. Lucius, my studio partner, and I, when we go in there, we're constantly looking for tethers. We're constantly looking for little items. This little chickadee and the rest of its nest is just kind of hidden away. There are a lot of little treasures within the dioramas that you got to look out for. And so we step lightly and we use this time to go over the different taxidermy, the different leaves, to see what needs touching up, what needs recoloring, what needs some attention. We work hand in hand with our curators and researchers, should anything need any assistance. We do a lot of conservation efforts with our taxidermists, or with our with our curators throughout the building. That's the beauty of working at the museum, is that we have so many experts that are usually on site or accessible to us. So we can ask if something's right, if this color is right, if the size is right, if there's a repair to be made, what would be the best way to go about doing that and handling these things. Um, so yeah, there are a ton of trees in this building. There are a ton of leaves. There are a ton of little birds. And we've been spending the last, oh, I don't know now. I don't know what month it is. The last month at least, going in and out, and trying to get all these things. Some of these things, you can reach just as you were like walking through the woods, but some of these things require a little bit of extra help. This is our TRex. Essentially, it's an extending lift that we can use to navigate in and around the trees. It's like threading a very large, fragile needle, essentially. And so we use this along with some other lifts throughout the building to get to these higher spots. This is my point of view from the TRex, just trying to get through and navigate my way between these different trees. Um, you do have some casualties every once in a while, but luckily we know what we're doing, and we can do some fixes if need be. But otherwise, we have a pretty good record of being able to get through here. So usually we tackle this by we'll look at the bigger picture. It's because it's a lot to take in. So we'll look at, let's say, the Piedmont, and we'll say I'm going to focus on this tree, this tree, and this tree, because to just you it's hard, you can't see the tree for the forest in this case. There's a lot to like try to figure out, and so we try to hone in on these different things so that we have a more of like a measured, um, something that can be measured, as far as I got the oak done, I got the pine tree done, because they all take their own kind of finesse to get through. A lot of these trees are just individually vacuumed, leaf by leaf by leaf. In some cases, we do like a wet wipe to get them cleaned. Um, we also do a lot of repairs while we're up there. While they're beautiful to look at, they are very fragile, and so all it takes is just like hitting something with a vacuum just right, and then you gotta fix the leaf. Or um, the other side of being an open air diorama setting is that things are within reach, because that's what we really want. We want the public to be able to feel immersed, to feel a part of it. But sometimes that means that people want to test out if things are real. People are curious. And so usually that test means breaking a branch, or pulling a little too hard, or, just snapping something off. And so we're there to make sure those things can get back into place. Um, that lift also affords us the ability to take care of our coastal hall, which some of you may know are just lined with these enormous whale skeletons, as well as a manatee and her baby. Um, and so I was actually asked yesterday, what is the largest animal I've ever had to clean? And I think that would be our blue whale. And you clean a blue whale from head to toe. You start at one spot and you find a good podcast or 6 or 7, and you just kind of work your way through. So here I am at the head of the whale, and then again, it's kind of the same process. Interesting thing about the blue whales, or the blue whale and some of the other whales like throughout the collection, is that they still are leaching a little bit of their oils, and with that they really want to cake on that dust that happens in the museum. um, and they're just constantly they're still thriving. It's interesting in a way. So a lot of this process is just, you vacuum. We use a very diluted warm water soap mixture. Again, this is with the approval and constant contact with our curator, to make sure that everything's on the up and up. We will also notify them if there is anything amiss, if there seems to be something cracking, some pressure being put somewhere. So far, so good. So that blue whale is there to stay. So here's some of the details actually of the vertebrae. You can see that gloss on there where the oil has been kind of leaching through. And that's, that's just something that we keep an eye on. We do this process, uh, one would say not often enough. I feel like want to go to cycle through the entire museum to do all the whales, to do all the dioramas, it would be essentially a year-long thing. So that's why we do it in these kind of like bite-sized chunks and try to keep our eyes on everything. It also helps maintain, the really good collection that we have. It's all very valuable, so we do want to keep eyes on these things and make sure that we preserve them. Here's a detail of that kind of that fresh leaching of the oil. It's not, I mean, it's real viscous, thicker than a molasses. So it's not gonna like drip on you anytime soon. It is just really interesting that you have this large animal that seems so still, and yet there's still something kind of activated in it. With that maintenance and upkeep of the dioramas, we do a lot of we also try to freshen it up. This is an example of some work that we had done years ago, going back into our waterfall. Um, we have lots of lime scaling. We have, again, dust. Dust is going to be my mortal enemy forever, I feel like. But also we have things, we're at like, uh, I don't even know how long ago it's been now since we had the plants touched up in there, but or when they were first installed. So this was maybe back in 2014, 2015 when I was revitalizing it. And so essentially like lights bleach out these things, lights will bleach out the different animals. And so we're going back and we're trying to recolor everything. And you color the leaves as if you would clean the leaves, leaf by leaf by leaf, trying to maintain a sense of accuracy. And so that means getting together with educators. And these leaves actually these ferns weren't even on site originally. So a lot of this is also additive process where we're trying to put even more content into the diorama. That could also mean adding insects, adding some other details that we just never had enough time. And it's a constantly changing process. And so we're always just kind of trying to make that grow. One of the other drawbacks to open air is that we will sometimes see things that want to eat our collection. And so that's what we're trying to be the gatekeepers of that. And so this is a case of a recent domestic issue where the carapace of this crab fell victim to some hungry insects. Our process now, we try to lean away from chemical fumigation. We talk with our curators and researchers, and we'll do a deep freeze. We want to make sure that everything is on the up and up. This also means anything that this crab was in proximity to, we also do a health check on. We make sure everybody's looking good. And so this crab actually is still in the deep freeze, and it'll be a fun kit to try to piece back together later. A lot of our collections, some things come to us with data. A lot of it is also without data. So there is no information loss, but you still have the loss of a really nice piece, really nice specimen. And so we do our best to try to keep ahead of that and stay proactive about that sort of thing. Another type of maintenance is just the general wear and tear that we have. The place is a very tactile place. It's real interactive. This wall, this is our wall by our salamanders in the mountain cove, which kids love to climb. And so with that, you get a lot of wear and tear on these rocks. This essentially is our base coat. This is all kind of speckled and just kind of broken apart. And so this is our base coating before Lucius and I went through and individually painted each of these rocks again to try to pull that naturalistic look off. And so that's just something that we have to constantly keep eyes on. We want the place to look good for everyone, and we want to make it when you see a crack in a rock, that really just that ruins your whole suspension of disbelief when you see that plaster poking through. And so we're just trying to keep everybody in the illusion and keep them in our nature. Some other things that we do are just completely revitalizing areas. We are currently working on the Acro Dome, the Terra of the South is also what it's called. And with that, we have been redoing this ground form. So sometimes that base coat's not enough. Sometimes it is chopping away layers and layers of plaster. Thank you, Ricky and Jimmy. We have an amazing fabrication team that also our amazing demolition team. And then we go back into it and we try to build it back up. So this is at its, at its most like core as far as just blocking out shapes. From there, we'll layer on layers of plaster, fiberglass, some layers of paint, really try to bring that texture back through. So if when you finally see this weeks from now, you won't even know, it'll just be seamless. It's a real delicate process that we do. It's a lot of balance of, really keeping good communication with our curators and making sure that we're not getting too heavy-handed. But it also affords us this really good opportunity to get up and close with things. I think that's what kind of keeps us all really passionate about this. Some other stuff that we do with outside of the dioramas or kind of in adjacent to the dioramas is we also serve our living collection group. This is the example of a recent hatch that was made for our living conservatory. And so with living collections, you get an extra challenge of making something look good, but also keeping it safe for the things that will interact with it. This project came about, it just kind of was tagged onto another project where we were, this is the piece with a more kind of final coat where you can see that kind of jump from unbelievable foam to a much more believable scene. This piece came about as part of another project where we have this beautiful tree in our living conservatory that sadly the edges were getting kind of worn away by our turtles. And so we try to find that harmony with the animals where we know that they're going to want to burrow under it, bite at it, who knows what else animals do with it. And so we want to preserve it as best we can while also maintaining the health of that animal. That is a lot of trial and error before it even gets the animal as far as prototyping, just making sure all the safeguards are there. This tree turned out really nicely, but from there, we've also done a lot of restoration work. This is a sample of a lot of the color matching that we try to do to try to keep things accurate. What you see here are photos of the Acrocanthosaurus from the Terra of the South. The acro, it has undergone, has been inundated with pyrite. And so all of those fossils have actually come off-site and are still being used throughout our paleontology lab. But to better preserve it and to also give visitors the experience of Acro, we have brought in all those original castings and essentially just repainted them to as best we could to match the original fossil coloration of Acro. It's probably one of my more favorite things to do. I could paint fossils all day. I love weathering. I love making things look old and while also still kind of tricking folks. Here's a setup of some of the ribs. We make do with space and time. And so when we have something as large as a dinosaur, you got to spread out as much as you can. This is a quick view of our shop. Actually, we have some really great tools. Ricky and Jimmy help maintain this area. This area not only serves as a prep area for us, but it also serves the wider museum. Ricky and Jimmy do things from hanging a shelf to essentially rebuilding cabinetry to making vitrines from scratch. Just a lot of what we can do can just be done from, the ground up with us, with such like a talented group as we have. Some other examples, we serve education. So we do a lot, education does really good outreach, but that also means that we're going to see a lot of handling, and a lot of like love and use on some of these things. So uh, we can do something as far as having to replace the eye of a bird. In this case, we ended up 3D printing some eyes to pop back in. We have a lot of resources on hand, from 3D printing to doing just traditional sculpture. We do a lot of casting and molding. If some of these things can't be replaced, we'll do our best to make it ourselves. We do some 3D rendering sometimes to then 3D print. If something isn't even available, say if you want um, I don't know, like some bacteria models, something that you can't go out to the store and get, something that's not readily available, Lucius and I are usually pretty happy to like try to get that out. Um, I mentioned serving the conservators. In this case, we do a lot of color matching to do things like, in this case, we ended up doing a tongue of this coyote. Um, it looked really good. It's now hanging in our naturalist center. Um, just trying to like step up the realism of things for us. Uh, and I don't know if a lot of you have had well, most people don't know, this is one of my favorite spots in the museum. It's actually the collections down in the basement. Exhibits is in the basement, and then collections is in the sub basement. Some of the more interesting parts of the museum that people just don't even get to see. So with that, we also serve our collections by doing things like helping with mounting, helping update bases, doing like more realistic bases. For example, this polar bear off to the side that needed its iceberg redone, needed its nose touched up. We do a lot of like these fun fixes to just keep everything looking good for everyone. This polar bear gets used a lot in events, and so again, it gets a lot of attention, and so we just have to make it look good. Um, yeah, I love fossils. Sorry, I have another fossil slide in here. In this case, fossils get taken off, or other items will get taken off site for research use, because again, we're this living museum, we're like a living laboratory. So the beauty of that is like people want to use what we have on display as well, and we're happy to oblige. Maybe I shouldn't speak with curators. I see a lot of really great collaboration happening between our curators and outside entities to further research. So in this case, the skull was taken off site, and so we were happy to cast that skull, paint it, and get it all ready and mounted up, and it just seemed like it was never gone in the first place. Um, Another thing that we like to do, along with our educators and the outreach that they do, this is an example of uh, working with the outreach to do like a birding program. Um, and with that, this gives us a lot more kind of accessible place to work with, as far as we've rendered these models, in this case, different indigenous birds that you would see, 3D printed, modeled a little bit further to make them even more realistic, and then painted them up to be used in an outdoor program. Um, Even though we have a great collection of birds downstairs, it wouldn't be something that, say, you would want to like take a bird out, take a taxidermy bird out and set it up for people to use or handle, or you would really wouldn't want it out in nature. Um, and so we're able to provide these things, these tools to other groups that the upkeep wouldn't be nearly as much. You don't have any broken wings, you don't have any broken feathers. Instead, we have these models that if they go missing, or if something should happen, we can just get back into them. Like I said, we're a changing museum, and so a lot of also of what we do is trying to stay on the pulse of everything and try to rearrange our spaces as need be. This, these last few months have been a perfect example of that. Just trying to get together and figure out what is going to best serve the community, what's going to best serve the overall purpose of the museum. And with that, Lucius and I have a great time trying to like play around these new spaces on a miniature level, um, and just kind of keep this idea, keep this constantly growing museum going. Um, some other examples of that would be use of new tech and old tech. Like I mentioned before, we've been upgrading the Terra of the South area, and so with that, we do a ton of prototyping. The team, essentially, how an idea like that comes together is all of us will come together. We have content, folks who make content, and the graphic designers, and the 3D modelers, and the fabricators, and then we bring in, in this case, the paleontologists and education, and then we bring in our inclusive committee, because we're trying to make this really good universal overall experience for everyone. And so with that, we can do lots of things like with prototyping, where we laser cut skulls. That could be a really nice tactile experience. We can laser cut this large sauropod to represent the large sauropod that's present in the Terra of the South. In this case, what you're seeing also is a 3D printed resin model of that pyrite, that this fossil that has been just inundated with pyrite, that would normally be way too fragile to cast. But now with this technology, we can work with paleontology and print something that we can make over and over and over again, and it's never gonna fall apart. At least not while I'm around. But with that, we can also then use that same model, that same thing, to do outreach. We can hand that pyrite off to a child and not worry if it's dropped, and they can really um, explore it. And so with that, it's a constant kind of going back and forth meetings, saying, how does this best serve everyone? Are we hitting all the marks as far as what we want to say with education? Is this accurate? Is this the right size? It's a real good, I mean, it's just like this really good, like, living organism that we've created to just make just a panel that wants to tell you about a skull. There's a lot of hands that go into that. And I have the pleasure of working with most of them. Here's another just another slide of just like all the prototyping that we like to do. This is for potential ground form that we'll be making for children to interact with. And so we're just kind of working to see like what is going to be the sturdiest thing for this, because in the end, we're still going to be the ones who need to take care of it. So we're just trying to make it easy on ourselves as well. But also what's going to make it, a pleasurable experience for the visitor. You don't want something too rough. You don't want something too soft or brittle. And so there's a lot of like thought that goes into all of these things to make sure that everyone is best suited. And with all these kind of developing things, again, I love to make stuff, but for everything I make, I then, we have to like do that collaboration again. So something that seems like a simple, hey, let's amend this area. This is a wing of our Whiteville branch, where we had redone the paleontology hall. And so we had all the objects, we had all the things, but it's still about making that story. And so that's where we lean heavy on our content providers to help us kind of piece together how all that's going to tie together. But then we lean on our graphics departments to say, like, how are we going to make this look good? And then the rest of us kind of team up, come in, and we make a room that was essentially just books at one point into a very educational experience for the folks down at Whiteville. And just we get to kind of do more of that outreach that maybe that population wasn't getting served before, and now we can help out there. Some other examples of the collaborative efforts. This is actually closed off at the moment. This is our citizen science project that we just recently did. we revitalized an area of the museum that just wasn't getting the attention. We have a really great collection of just like a full collection of, it's supposed to be examples of what the the collection area in the basement would look like. We realized that wasn't getting showcased well enough, so then that got moved, and so it could be more in the traffic area that people would actually get to interact with and see it. But with that, we then had this blank spot, and we wanted to, um, since this is the NEC, the older building, we also wanted to start tying together this imagery of the NRC, which has like a flashier and newer kind of look to it. And so this is this kind of middle ground that we're starting to come to between the two buildings. Um, with this certain project, we talked to educators, we reached out to folks at Prairie Ridge, we talked to people who are doing things like iNaturalist, and it was really about trying to get the visitor involved on a whole other level outside of the museum. Um, and so, my part was just doing a model, painting it, Lucius doing all the plant life that went along with it. But then you see that it's within this like beautiful case that I could have never built. And that's where, the designers come in with our fabricators and then work hand in hand to make a really nice finished piece. But with that, behind it, there's a television that also has all this wonderful content that I could have not done. And from that content, I was able to make my own things, but our content providers also come in. So it's a lot of hats that we wear to keep this place up and running. And then lastly, it's just kind of a constant changing thing that there's never a dull day there. And one of the more challenging things that we see now with recent events is that the thing that I love to do so much, which is making tactile, touchable things, is something that we're having to pull back from for the safety of the public and for the concerns of the public. And so we're having to think of outside of that. Uh, how can we still reach people? How can we give them a great experience while not being able to always touch something? How do we keep something accessible? We don't want to limit any population from this experience. And so in that case, it's still a matter of giving people a more like intimate thing. Like maybe we make multiple models that can then be cleaned and sanitized. You Chris had mentioned all the efforts I've been going through as far as sanitation goes. And so a lot of that has even been and it's pretty seamless. Like I had to look for the things that we had actually changed in some spots because they just look like they belong. Removing things like lift panels and interactives, but then replacing them with just beautiful graphics that make it seem like they've been there all this time, and they still tell the story. They still get the education across. And so we're still kind of figuring some of that stuff out. There's some areas that are still off limits for different reasons as far as traffic flow and interactivity. And that's just the beauty of this museum, that we're always going to be kind of evolving and figuring out how to tell the story of science. And so with that, Chris, I guess I'm good to take some questions. I know I kind of generalized stuff there. I can talk about any one of these things for hours, but yeah, I just want to do like an overarching.
Jason, thanks so much.
Yeah. Let me stop share too, so we're not just staring at all this stuff.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
It's like I work in the museum, but it's still really exciting to see so much of the behind the scenes and the thought that goes into each individual piece, from an individual leaf up to, the giant dinosaurs that we've got.
Right.
So excellent stuff. And I should say the chat has been going off. One, they love it. But tuning in today, we've apparently got like a nice contingent of exhibit designers and fabricators from other institutions, and I think future exhibit designers.
Excellent.
who tuned into the show. So they've been having some pretty fabulous conversations about materials and
Mhm.
techniques.
Oh, sure.
Uh, there's a lot of
That's
knowledge.
a whole other show in itself, honestly. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I can elaborate on any of those things. So like I said, we do, my schooling was in sculpture, so I do a lot of like traditional materials. Or I used to do a lot of, I try to blend the two now, but it was a lot of mold making, making things in clay, making things in plaster, pulling molds, casting molds. And now I leaned heavily on 3D printing and just kind of dove into that. It was maybe my first year. I think we had already acquired a 3D printer. Nobody was using it, and then I, yeah, with the help of our Biz Lab over in the NRC, those wonderful guys, they were they helped me kind of get my bearings as far as 3D printing goes. They're a great resource for the high tech, and from there, we've gotten two other 3D printers. One is a resin printer. We've got our laser cutter. Um, so yeah, we're no strangers to playing with different materials for sure. Um, we do a lot of stuff with just epoxies and clays and whatever we can. We like to play. We like to see what's gonna best fit, from flexible filament that a child can like pull and pry and do their best to break it. They still might break it. To these more rigid things that you can stomp around on and play on.
Cool. Thank you.
Hmm.
So let's see, in the minutes that we've got remaining, we got lots of times for questions. Don't worry, everybody. Let me get to what some of these folks have been talking about. Let's see. Jens Koch, I wonder, do you reshuffle the leaves from the leaf litter on the ground when you clean the dioramas, or do you put every leaf back in the same place?
We number each leaf with a little tape, and then no, it yeah. So we shuffle. We also just, I mean, they're leaves. They're gonna fall apart on us. So they're real leaves, the ones on the ground, and so a lot of that they fall prey to us just walking around. From cords dragging across. They're also accessed by living collections. Occasionally, something lands in the middle of that diorama that's thrown or just happens to find its way there that we have to go in and get. Um, so those leaves get crushed, or they get kind of mounded with this, I don't know, this like weird amalgam dust bunny monster that we can't fight off. It's crazy how things clump together. And so short answer, we try to kind of like fluff them up, try to get the better color showing. Where we can't do that, then we need to look at things like collection, actually going out into the field and collecting, but trying to maintain what trees we have in a diorama. So down in the basement, we have bins and bins of leaves that say savanna, red maple, but you can't just mix those all in if you don't have that certain tree there, or if you're not on the coast, you can't have this kind of tree. And so we have to be mindful of all that too. We also have to be mindful of, again, fumigation. You're essentially taking a yard's worth of trees, and you want to make sure there's no bugs in there. So there's a lot of thought that goes into that maintenance of it. We are actually, we're looking at revitalizing some things, because over the years we've been pulling and pulling from this collection that, those leaves have still somehow sustained themselves. They've been like tied up in, airtight bags downstairs, but we keep drawing from them, and eventually, you're out of leaves. And so that's going to mean a trip, uh, spring. Those dioramas are supposed to be taking place, I believe like late March, like in the morning. And so we're trying to even stay true to that. We're trying to stay true to a time, when you would see these things. So we don't want something to look as if it's blooming if it's really not blooming yet. And that's a constant thing that you have to kind of like be like, thoughtful of.
Wow. Wow, that's really
That
impressive.
was the short answer. Sorry.
Yeah. Let's see. Chelsea wants to know, what do you clean them with? Do you use a specific type of cleaner?
Um,
Probably
the,
not the stuff I get at the grocery store.
I mean, well, the leaves are just essentially vacuumed and it's like a regular soap solution sometimes if needed. Sometimes that stuff gets kind of caked on. Um, but yeah, it's all pretty grocery friendly. We're not trying to do any intense chemicals in there. We haven't done really like any intense cleaning with the animals or the taxidermy. Sometimes we do more additive stuff, like I mentioned before, the birds will get kind of bleached out. If something's near a window, we'll need to touch that up. Like there's a couple of birds in Coastal Hall that I've gone back over with archival inks and either airbrushed or essentially hand painted some areas with the ink to brighten it back up. Um, but all the cleaning, yeah, everyone can come clean. Anyone can do it. We'd be happy to have it. It's a lot of trees.
A lot of leaves.
Hmm.
All right. Abby wants to know if you have a favorite exhibit in the museum or one that you're especially proud of.
Um, uh,
That's
they're
probably a
all
really
really
hard
good. I
question.
mean, I've if I wasn't the person to make it, I've been one of the people to help maintain it. So you get kind of close to these things. Um, One of my very first exhibits, or one of the very first things I was trusted with when I came on, I think I was still even volunteering, was there was a large weather balloon on the second floor of the NRC. We had a actual weather balloon there that would just have to maintain air pressure in it. It doesn't want to do that for atmosphere, for leaks, for whatever. Um, and so then I was tasked with the job of just making a giant balloon um, out of, so it's essentially a solid balloon. And I feel really good about that because, you're trying to make this light, airy thing out of very dense materials. I feel great about that because that was one of the first projects I was just kind of like given the reins on. My mentor at the time, who was an exhibit designer there before I was, she was great at like helping me just kind of pick out colors and like choose things, but really kind of would take a step back and let me just have a go at things. And it's an enormous thing, and I normally like working little, so I think that I was put out of my comfort zone. I was given this new challenge and like trusted with something, and so I I look to that one a lot for like when I'm feeling kind of like, meh. Um, they're all fun. I mean, again, I love the fossils. I could paint fossils all day. Um, One of my favorite things is to paint and then compare and see if I can actually fool the expert, um, which sometimes they don't like. That's not always a fun game for them. It can get it can get a little tricky. One of the best compliments I got was when uh, the director of exhibits had mentioned how the bog turtles, were acting in a peculiar way. They seemed closer than normal, and he thought it was just bizarre that they were so close. And I was like, well, that's because I put them in that position. They're not real turtles. That felt real good. That was kind of like the stamp of approval for me. So I'm pretty proud of that one.
So, folks in the chat were very impressed with your fossil painting.
Well, thanks.
And Carrie was saying, Carrie Whitman, I mold and cast fossils and I'm decent at painting the cast, but it would be great to learn more about your technique in painting realistic fossil casts.
Yeah, I feel like that's a whole other talk. A lot of it is just me just trying to be patient with myself, and you probably being patient with yourself as well. Like it's a lot of layering. It's a lot of mistakes. It's a lot of I mean, again, I have the luxury of having that fossil in a collection somewhere where I can ask to see it. I can take great photos with it and just keep going back and forth, seeing it in the light that it's going to be in. Um, but I get real kind of picky about some things. But one of our paleontologists he was great to communicate with me. So he was very open with his critiques as far as, if the red seemed too red, like that's not the clay bed that we would have found this in, or that's not the sediment that would be around it. Like, just, turn it back a little bit. But a lot of it is just being kind of patient with yourself. It's a lot of layering. It's a lot of washes. and then wiping those washes off and then doing dry brushing. Yeah, maybe I'll work on a whole other tutorial for that because I love it. Absolutely do.
We should definitely do that. Okay. Megan wants to know, how do you balance giving guests the opportunity to interact with the exhibit with ensuring that the components last?
Yeah, that's a great question.
That is the question.
Yeah, I think some of it is just accepting that maybe it won't last and just kind of figuring out ways, like I said, like with the 3D printing, we can make these skulls that maybe you wouldn't want to hand over an actual skull of a like teeny tiny shrew that could easily get crushed or dropped or lost under a foot. But you can you can still empower people with giving them something in its likeness. Um, and then if it doesn't last, I'll make you another one, especially if it's a fossil. Um, but yeah, it's hard. I mean, you don't have that guarantee. I mean, and also it's not even about the visitor. Like I've mishandled things. Things get, some of our repairs are just things being transitioned from like backup to the cart, and these things happen. Um, so I think it's just a matter of being diligent and just kind of accepting that nothing's gonna last as far as some of these things, and just be okay with that. And it's good job insurance for me anyway. So yeah.
How often do guests do damage to exhibits?
um I mean, like I said, it's hard to say who does what. um I
Sometimes it's us.
I got a little cocky and took out a branch, a small branch with that lift the other day because I was overconfident. And luckily that was all, the only damage, and that happens. I mean, and it might happen. I mean, I'm pretty good. We do like walkthroughs. We try to keep an eye on everything. So it's not like it's always manageable. And there's things that are gonna be like the hot spots. There are things that I know, if there's if it's been a big weekend, if we've had a really good event, I know that thing's gonna be more susceptible to being touched. Um, and so I'll check on it, and yeah, sometimes it's broken, but it's really never a surprise. And I get it. I mean, we want people to interact with these things, and I know it's getting used. Um, I might say a few choice words about it that morning when I come in, and I have to glue it back together and repaint it. But I know it's also getting appreciated. I know it's getting cared for, and like, who's to say, like, maybe that kid leaned too hard on something. Maybe, yeah, maybe they just didn't know their own strength. They didn't know how curious they really were. Um, but I mean, it happens. It happens often enough that I know I'm going to be busy.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Nathan wants to know, is there any guidance against using a clear resin for sealing the surfaces of organic components?
Oh, fun. Um, I hope not. We we recently I mean, things you want to think about as far as clear resins are, some of the things are exotropic, or they want to like, or exothermic, sorry. They want to like put off a heat, so you may see some discoloration of things, like they're essentially getting baked if it's too hot of a resin. They make different specialty resins for doing things like encapsulation, and people do it all the time. um, the fabrication team actually was tasked with making this. It's I'm not going to get it right, and someone else will have to chime in on it, but it's essentially this enormous leaf that's made up of other leaves, but it essentially is its own leaf. I, I'm not the expert here, but it's giant. It's like a tabletop, and they were able to encapsulate that in a resin, um, and that was like real time sensitive, um, and so far so good. I guess you just want to make sure that that thing is really covered, because you don't want anything to degas. You don't want anything to like really decompose, but essentially it shouldn't once it's like trapped in there. Just keep in mind with, like, I guess, what that material is, or what that thing that you're trying to trap is, because like you'll get an air bubble in there. You might I don't know, it's real tricky. There's a lot of different things that could go wrong with it. Resins are real precarious. They keep you on your toes for sure.
So let's talk a little bit more about fossils.
Yeah.
Elizabeth wanted to know how much of the acro on display is the real fossil.
0. And we have that, so that's part of like getting together with the paleontologists and the content writers. Like we've addressed that, and so we have that there, and we're actually going to readdress it further in a much more kind of focused way. Redoing reader panel or reader rails, and just really leaning into it and saying like, this is what it is. But that's the beauty of it. We still have it. We still have these fossils that researchers can use, folks can still see in some means or another. But yeah, the first was there's the single skull that was outside of the case that was pulled some time ago for the pyrite, and then the actual acro was just kind of slowly taken off. I thought I had a picture of that. Sorry, where it was just bit by bit by bit and slowly kind of cradled and taken off. And those things have been preserved like in a vacuum, essentially. The preppers have gone over those and like, picked it through as best they can and are trying their best to like mitigate any of the problems with that. I can't speak too much to the science behind that, but yeah, 0 for now, which is why we want to try to still keep it accessible to people. Like we didn't want to take that stuff off site. We still want to keep that that image because it's still a foreboding animal. And with that, we also realized that the acro the bones are behind this glass and it's still not accessible to people. So we, in redoing this, we've also talked about making a touchable kind of low relief acro that should you be impaired in any way that you can't really sense it behind the glass, you could at least feel it out or experience like all that high spine that it has, and still enjoy it for what it is.
All right. So a little bit earlier, you showed us a small skull that you made and painted a replica for to replace one on exhibit that had been pulled for research.
Mm-hmm.
Do we do that all the time? Chelsea was asking if is that always the process? Do we make replicas for stuff that that visitors won't see for a while?
This one had been off-site for a while, and it was also a really interesting piece. And I think we were looking at revitalizing some other things in that case, and so there's also a new. It's not a Postasuchus. I'm gonna get in trouble for that. There's another earlier fossil that was also getting added to that piece, and so these things aren't always easy to get into. It takes a couple of people to get into it and maintain it. And so it was one of those like, while we're in there, how about we address this and look at this? And it just so happened that there was a cast already available. So the paleontology lab had already had a mold ready and a cast ready. So that's easier to do if they exist. Some other things that we've seen, like with the pyrite model that I was making, the paleontology lab had been doing scans of that model. And so I think it's a matter of, if we can't replace it, cool, let's get that out there so that people can still see it and still experience it. If not, can we replace it with something else that's just as meaningful or tells a similar story? And that's when we start having those meetings. Then that's when the content providers start saying, well, this is a really good story, but what about this? And then maybe you don't replace that fossil, maybe you get a whole other bit of story there with it.
What modeling software was used for the feather texturing on the birds?
So that is a mixture of been doing some ZBrush. ZBrush is a paid program, but we also use Blender and Sculptress. Sculptress was how I first kind of like dipped my toes in the modeling software world, because Sculptress is free, and it's real easy to get into. It's also real easy to like get wrong. Like I normally go up on these kind of tangents where it starts getting really wrong. But the texturing, and I've been diving deeper into it because just the the people out there doing digital renderings are there's just been amazing work, and I think that's what's been also that's been a new kind of passion for me is like I feel really good about like sculpting something in clay. I know when I make this mark, it's gonna make that mark, but then to do it on this, with a stylus on a screen is a whole other challenge, which I'm really into. You don't get that physical feedback per se, but it's been real interesting to also have an undo button because that's a lot easier to do than scrapping your sculpture or having to scrap that mold because you got an air pocket or something didn't work out. Like that's been the beauty of doing 3D rendering and 3D printing is that you can do all sorts of iterations of something. And when you talk to that expert and they say, well, that scale is like just a little bit off, you can say whoop and drag your mouse and scale it up. And that's been really nice. So yeah, I like those programs. ZBrush is for when you really get into it. Blender's really good. You can do a lot of like hard surfaces, and Blender is surprising how great it is because is that okay to endorse things? I have really enjoyed it because it's all encompassing. You can do like animation, you can do all sorts of like scene renderings with it. And I've only been using it for like maybe 5% of like what you can use it for. Lucius does it a lot for like different layouts. He's really great at doing like hard surfaces and like more geometric things, repeating patterns that we want to use. It's been great at making, he's used it to make very specific holders for things. And so we can do a lot more customization with it. And it's amazing me that you can do that and do it for free. And yeah, it's a good system out there if you want to start it on your own.
All right. Well, it looks like our time is just about up. I'll ask one more question. Winky face. This one's from Roy.
Oh, okay.
Will 3D printing pretty much replace the hand modeling, carving, and casting methods used before?
Um, I think the final product could get, I don't know, it's another hammer, really, 3D printing. And I think lots of people can use a hammer, but maybe it's a very specialized hammer. It's just one more tool, really. But I think to use that tool, you need to know how to use these other tools. Like, I think to do 3D printing, you still have to come at it from a three-dimensional mind. And I think being able to go in both of those worlds, have that physical feedback, know that like if you physically pushed in on something, you're going to get this kind of indentation or this shadow, then to like, transcribe that to the screen. I think the two, I don't know that it will ever replace it. I think the two will always kind of live in some sort of like harmony. I think that's real important. I think it's important to hold on to that sort of traditional sense because like, I don't know, it's nice to know that there's still been like a human hand, a human touch in on that. And I think, yeah, I think the two will always kind of like cohabitate. Roy.
All right. Well, I think if folks have like really detailed questions about design and fabrication,
Sure.
they could probably get in touch with you because there's
Great.
some really good conversations happening over here on the chat
Cool. Yeah, I
with
love talking
other
shop.
local designers
Okay, great.
and
Yeah, I love to
fabricators.
talk
So,
shop. I love to like talk about fabrication and making things. Yeah, I do it all
well,
day.
it's been great to hear your stories and see the depth of knowledge that you have, but all of the different applications that you get to apply it has been really, really exciting.
Awesome. Thank you. Thanks for giving me this opportunity to like try to like showcase this a little bit. Like it's a good team. I feel very lucky to get to do this. Like I get to make fossils every day. Like yeah, it's pretty awesome. So yeah, thanks for letting me brag for a while. It's great. Appreciate it.
All right, everybody. Well, that'll wrap up our show. Thanks for tuning in to the Lunchtime Discovery series, brought to you by the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences and the Office of Environmental Education. We'll be here again next Wednesday at noon. You can find out more about the programs that are coming up at the website for the Office of Environmental Education. Just give them a search on the web, or even better, if you're on Twitter, you can follow them at North Carolina EE. That's at North Carolina, capital E, capital E. And there you can get links to future talks, their website, all that kind of stuff. And they tweet out some really cool stuff if you like science and nature. They're good people to follow. You can follow the museum, who are also good people to follow, on social media too. We're at Natural Sciences on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And I'll remind everybody that the museum downtown, our Prairie Ridge Eco Station, and our location in Whiteville, North Carolina, we are all open. We opened up yesterday. We welcomed so many visitors back on the first day too. New protocols in place to keep everybody safe. A few new rules, but not too many. Most importantly of which is that you need a free timed ticket in order to visit the museum. So head to naturalsciences.org/open to get all of the information you need in order to come and visit our downtown location. With that said, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll see you next Wednesday at noon. And you know what? While you're at the museum's website, I should say, check out the virtual events calendar. There's cool stuff happening pretty much every day of the week that you can tune into and be a part of. If you subscribe to the museum's YouTube channel, we're uploading new videos all the time, including more live programming. So lots of great stuff that I know you want to be a part of. So with that, have a great Wednesday, everybody. We'll see you again real soon. Bye.